let's take a closer look at the myth behind Fate's Day Knight's Berserker. The Greeks called him Heracles, the Romans Hercules, but they both refer to the same hero, a demigod born from Zeus, the god of thunder, and a human woman, Alcmene, the queen of thieves and granddaughter of the greatest Greek hero to exist at the time, Perseus. But Perseus was also a son of Zeus, so that makes him both the great-grandfather and half-brother of Heracles. I know, it's weird. You should also know that Heracles wasn't his birth name. He was actually named Alcaeus, but you'll see why he made the switch soon. Now, Zeus already had Hera as his wife, so Zeus had to take on the form of Alcmene's husband in order to lay with her, which resulted in one of Alcmene's two sons to be the illegitimate son of Zeus, and Hera knew it, so she had plotted various ways to kill him. Before Heracles was even born, Hera had sent two witches to prevent his birth, but luckily they were diverted to the wrong room. Hera then sent two serpents to kill him as a baby, but young Heracles easily strangled them both. After these attempts, Alcmene grew wary of Hera's plot to eliminate Heracles, so in order to protect him, she abandons him in the woods, where he is then found and picked up by the goddess Athena. Athena brings baby Heracles directly to Hera, who didn't realize at the time that the baby was the very person that she was trying to kill. Out of pity for this abandoned child, she nurses him with her own breast, granting him even more strength and power than your typical demigod. Later in life, Heracles is raised by his mortal father Amphitryon and his court, which included some of the best teachers in the land. He was taught horseback riding, fencing, archery, even how to play instruments and sing. But one day during a music lesson with Linus, the son of Apollo, Heracles gets into an argument and lashes out. He grabs a lyre and hits Linus over the head with it, accidentally killing him with the blow, unknowing at the time of his own godlike strength. Because of this, Amphitryon sends Heracles away to become a cowherd, a shepherd if you will, where he gains a few opportunities to use his strength. Again, later in life, Heracles becomes an accomplished hero, especially to King Creon of Thebes. He had helped defeat an opposing army, and King Creon was very grateful for it. As a sign of thanks, he gave Heracles his daughter, Megara, to marry. With her, he had 3 sons, and lived a peaceful, happy life with his family. But Hera saw this and resented him for it, so in response, she induces madness within him, which in turn causes him to kill his children. After returning from his state of rage, he realizes what he had just done and becomes overcome with grief. He goes to seek out advice from an oracle, who then advises him to appease to Hera by changing his name from Alcaeus to Heracles, as well as to atone for his sins by becoming a slave to his cousin, Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns and Mycenae, who, fun fact, would not have been king had Hera not delayed Heracles' birth by a day. This is what leads to the famous 10, technically 12, labors of Heracles, the series of impossible tasks that King Eurystheus assigned to him over his 12 years of service. In exchange for being able to complete these labors, not only would he be atoned for the death of his family, but he would also be granted immortality. The first labor was the Nemean lion, a vicious monster whose claws were sharper than any sword and golden fur that was impervious to any attack from mortal weapons. It was terrorizing the city of Nemea and was said to have taken women as hostages. Any warrior that attempted to slay it would be devoured and their bones offered to Hades. Upon Heracles' first encounter with the lion, he attempted to slay it with a bow, not knowing that the fur made the beast impervious to such attacks. After coming to this realization, Heracles goes for a more close-quarters approach and waits for the beast to enter its lair, where he then stuns it with a club and proceeds to strangle it to death. Other accounts of the story say he just fired arrows until he hits the beast in its unarmored mouth. Either way, Heracles completed the task rather easily, but Eurystheus warned that each labor would become more difficult than the last. The second labor was a special one, the Lernaean hydra, a serpentine water monster raised by Hera specifically for the purpose of killing Heracles. It had poisonous breath and blood so deadly that even smelling it would kill you. It dwelled in the lake of Lerna, a place that was thought to be the entrance to the underworld. As Heracles approaches the swamps surrounding Lake Lerna, he covers his mouth and nose to protect himself from the hydra's poisons. He then lures it out by firing flaming arrows into its lair. As the hydra is escaping, he uses a sickle or a sword to decapitate the creature. However, this is a hydra that we're talking about here, and when you cut off one head, 2 more grow back. Seeing as he could not defeat the creature by simply cutting off its head, he calls for help from his nephew. The nephew advises Heracles to cauterize the open necks of each hydra after decapitating them. That way they wouldn't be able to grow back. Hera, seeing as her creature was about to be destroyed, sends a giant crab to distract him. However, Heracles just crushes it under his mighty feet and continues to slay the hydra. After slaying both creatures, Hera commemorates them by placing them into the sky as the constellations Hydra and Cancer, and this would complete the second labor. Though, because Heracles sought out assistance from his nephew, Eurystheus didn't qualify it as one of the 10 labors. The next labor was the Ceryneian hind, also known as the golden hind, a creature that was very dear to the goddess of the hunt, Artemis. It had golden antlers, hooves of bronze, and was faster than an arrow in flight. Heracles did not have to slay this creature though. No, for it was clear to Hera and Eurystheus that fighting monsters was far too easy for him. This time he had to catch the golden hind. The purpose of this task was to place Heracles in a lose-lose situation. If he failed, he couldn't repent. If he succeeded, then he would incite Artemis's anger. At least that's what the king hoped for. But after spending an entire year chasing this animal all throughout Greece, Heracles finally caught it as it slept. While returning to the king with the hind, he encounters Artemis and Apollo. Heracles begs for forgiveness and states that he was going to release the animal after showing that he had captured it. Contrary to what Eurystheus thought would happen, Artemis forgave him, and Heracles' third labor was then complete. Upset that his plan had failed, the king gave Heracles yet another dangerous task. This time, he had to capture the Erymanthian boar alive, a giant, wild, and raging beast. During this, he encountered Chiron and his fellow centaurs. In my Chiron video, I actually go over this encounter in more detail, since this was a key event that led to Chiron's demise. Aside from that, Chiron had given Heracles the advice he needed in order to capture the boar. By driving it into a patch of thick snow, he could catch the beast while it was exhausted and capture it with much less of a struggle. And that's exactly what Heracles did to complete the fourth labor. The fifth turned out to be a much simpler task, but still deemed impossible by others, as well as carried the intent to humiliate Heracles more than anything. He was told to clean the stables of King Augean. This king had possessed stables that were home to the most cattle in the country, and they had never been cleaned before. With 3,000 cattle and 30 years for all the filth to accumulate, you can imagine that this could very well be Heracles' hardest task yet. But Heracles upped the ante even more by telling Augean that if he could clean it all in a single day, then he would claim 1/10 of the cattle for himself. Augean accepted. Heracles then proceeded to complete the task in a single day by diverting not one but 2 entire rivers to wash out the stable in its entirety. However, because the majority of work for this task was done by the rivers and not Heracles himself, Eurystheus disregarded this as a completed labor as well. The next assignment was another go slay this one. Heracles had to defeat the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks, poisonous dung, and metallic feathers that they could launch as projectiles. These were actually the pets of Artemis that had migrated to a marsh and bred quickly without restraint. Heracles couldn't enter the marsh directly because the ground couldn't support his weight, so instead, he sets himself up on a mountain overlooking the marsh and snipes each of the birds with arrows dipped in poison from the hydra, thus completing the 6th labor. The 7th was another capture mission. This time it was the Cretan bull, a gift to King Minos from Poseidon, intended to be used as an offering, but instead it was kept alive. Poseidon, who was angered by this, makes King Minos' wife fall in love with the bull, and the resulting kin is the first Minotaur. Then Poseidon enrages the bull, causing it to wreak havoc on the land. Heracles was able to sneak up on the bull and wrestle with it a little before finally subduing and capturing it, completing the 7th labor. Heracles' 8th labor was to steal the mares of Diomedes. Diomedes was the king of Thrace and the son of Ares, the god of war. His mares were a group of 4 man-eating horses. Each were majestic on their own, yet untamable because of their diet of human flesh. Heracles brought along some young companions with him to gather the horses, but after being chased by Diomedes' men, he had no choice but to turn and fight. He left the horses with the youth, and after defeating Diomedes, he returned to find that one of the horses had eaten one of his companions. Enraged by this, Heracles fed Diomedes to the horses, and then used that opportunity to tie their mouths shut, which allowed for a less dangerous journey back to Eurystheus. With that labor complete, the ninth became a task to retrieve the belt of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. The belt was a gift from her father Ares, and this would have been the easiest task yet, if Hera had not interfered. You see, Hippolyta was very impressed by Heracles' accomplishments, and would have agreed to give him the belt, but Hera disguised herself as an Amazon, and told them that the strangers that were coming were there to abduct their queen. The Amazons then rode to confront Heracles, and when they did, Heracles thought that Hippolyta had planned to never give up the belt in the first place and put up a fight regardless. So Heracles defends the attack, kills Hippolyta, takes the belt for himself, and sails back home, having completed the ninth labor. Labor 10 was to capture the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a giant that had 3 heads, 6 arms, and 6 legs. He lived on the island of Erythia to the far west. The journey there was an adventure in itself that had various side stories among it, like while crossing the Libyan desert, Heracles tried to shoot an arrow at the sun and gained the chariot of Helios because of it. When he finally reaches the island, he finds the cattle to be guarded by the 2-headed dog Orthrus and the herdsman. He kills both with a single blow from his olive wood club. Geryon overheard the commotion and geared up with 3 shields, 3 spears, and 3 helmets. Heracles decides to flee and snipes Geryon from afar with one of his trusted poison-tipped arrows, ending the fight before it even began. Though that wasn't the hard part. In order for the labor to be counted as successful, he needed to deliver the herd in its entirety. Some cattle got stolen and some were scattered by Hera herself, but within a year he managed to retrieve them all again. Hera, determined to make Heracles fail this labor, raised the level of a river that he needed to pass, making it uncrossable. Heracles, having absolutely none of it, piled stones into the river to make the water less deep. He crossed and delivered the cattle to Eurystheus, completing the 10th labor. Now, normally he would be done the labors, but because 2 of his previous 10 were discounted, there were 2 additional ones that were requested of him. This 11th labor was to steal the golden apples of Hesperides. The Hesperides were the nymphs of the evening that inhabited a special orchid that belonged to Hera. In this garden could be found a single apple tree that produces golden apples. The only problem, Heracles didn't know where the garden was. To solve this, he confronted a shape-shifting sea god and got the location. En route to the garden, he encountered the imprisoned titan Prometheus, the one that stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. Heracles freed Prometheus, and in return, Prometheus told him that his brother Atlas would be able to guide him to the sacred garden. However, Atlas was occupied with carrying the heavens on his shoulders. It was punishment for aiding the Titans during their war with the gods. So he offered Heracles a deal. If Heracles would hold the heavens in his absence, Atlas will in turn retrieve the golden apples. Heracles agreed, and with Athena's assistance, he was able to support the heavens while Atlas traveled to the gardens and took the golden apples. This wasn't that bad of a trade because Hera had trained a 100-headed dragon known as the Ladin to defend the golden apple tree. After returning with the apples in hand, Atlas was reluctant to take the heavens back, but before he wandered off, Heracles tricked Atlas into taking back his position under the pretense of switching to a more comfortable position. But instead of switching back again, he just took the apples and left. This was the labor that Eurystheus truly thought to be impossible. But yet again, Heracles turned up successful. The 12th and final labor was the capture of Cerberus, the Hound of Hades, a 3-headed hellhound that guards the gates of the underworld and prevents the dead from leaving. Funnily enough, Cerberus was actually the brother of every other multi-headed monster that Heracles had slain. Now, as Hermes and Athena guide Heracles through the underworld, he meets Hades and requests to bring his hellhound back to the surface. Hades agrees, but under the condition that he captures the beast without using any weapons. So Heracles once again wrestles with yet another mythological creature and subdues it with only his hands. He brings the beast of hell to Eurystheus and completes the final labor. The king, frightened by this 3-headed hound and the strength of Heracles to overcome such a beast along with the 11 other labors, cowers in fear and releases Heracles from his duties, counting this as the 12th and final labor. Now you'd think that this would be the end of his story, but this merely marked the beginning of Heracles' journey as an immortal demigod and Greece's greatest hero. But still, all throughout the rest of his life, Hera despised his existence, and eventually, Heracles was killed by the very hydra poison that he used to achieve so much, and it was from the actions of his wives no less. As he succumbs to the poison, he builds his own pyre and lights himself on fire, leaving his mortal body behind and rising to Olympus to be judged by Zeus. The gods acknowledge his heroic feats, and they make a seat for him in Olympus alongside the rest of them, marking him as a god himself. And that's the story of Heracles/Hercules, an absolute unit that just kept doing task after task, not knowing that it was his very birth that resulted in such things. It's a shame that he was constantly tormented by Hera, but if not for that, he wouldn't be the hero that we all know today. And now, he's a Berserker servant that fights in the Holy Grail War. Of course, this summary of him and his 12 labors is just one of the many variants that can be told, and there's still plenty more to his story. But I think I've shared enough of the interesting stuff. Anyway, next time we'll go over all his skills and abilities in Fate to see just how strong he is in the Holy Grail War. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!